Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of Luna Station. The blue glow painted her weathered face as she studied the strange signal that had arrived just 6 hours ago. Around her, dozens of technicians worked at their stations, their fingers flying over controls as they tried to decode what appeared to be a desperate message from somewhere beyond human space. "Play it again," Chen ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years commanding humanity's most dangerous missions. The alien transmission filled the room with sounds unlike anything they had heard before. High-pitched whistles mixed with deep rumbling tones that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The universal translator struggled with the language, producing broken fragments that chilled everyone present. "Help, dying, swarm comes, worlds burn, please." Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's lead xenolinguist, approached the Admiral with sweat beading on his forehead. "Admiral, we've made significant progress with the translation matrix. The signal definitely originated from the Kepler 442 system, approximately 18 light-years from Earth. The language patterns suggest a highly advanced civilization, but—" He paused, clearly disturbed by what he had discovered. "But what, Doctor?" Chen demanded. "The mathematical models embedded in their distress call indicate they're facing something that has already consumed dozens of star systems. They're calling it the endless hunger, some kind of hive-minded species that strips planets bare of all biological matter before moving on." Chen felt a familiar coldness settle in her stomach. Humanity had been alone in the galaxy for so long that the discovery of alien life should have been cause for celebration. Instead, their first contact was a desperate cry for help against what sounded like an extinction-level threat. "How long ago was this signal sent?" she asked. "Given the distance and the timestamps we can decipher, approximately 3 weeks. Admiral, if this species operates at even a fraction of the speed they describe, those aliens might already be dead." The command center fell silent, except for the hum of machinery. Chen had fought pirates in the asteroid belts, led evacuation missions from dying colonies, and commanded the defense of Mars during the AI rebellion 15 years ago. But this was different. This was bigger than anything humanity had ever faced. "Admiral," came a voice from across the room. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her console with wide eyes. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures moving through the Kepler system. Whatever's happening there, it's still happening." Chen nodded grimly. "Rodriguez, patch me through to Earth Command, Mars Defense Grid, and all colony administrators. Priority Alpha authorization." Within minutes, the faces of humanity's most powerful leaders appeared on screens around the room. President Martinez of Earth, General Harrison from Mars, and colony representatives from across human space all stared at Chen with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen began, "humanity has just received our first confirmed communication from an alien species. Unfortunately, it's a distress call." She quickly outlined the situation, watching as expressions shifted from wonder to horror. "You're telling us there's some kind of space locust out there eating entire worlds?" General Harrison's gruff voice cut through the stunned silence. "That appears to be an accurate, if simplified, description, General. The question now is what we do about it." President Martinez leaned forward in her chair. "Admiral, with all due respect, this isn't our fight. We have no obligation to these aliens, and frankly, we don't have the resources to wage war against an interstellar threat." "Mr. President," Dr. Webb interrupted, his voice shaking slightly. "Based on the trajectory data we've analyzed, after consuming the Kepler system, the optimal path for maximum resource acquisition would lead this endless hunger directly toward our own solar system. We estimate 18 months, maybe less, before they reach our outer colonies." The silence that followed was deafening. Chen watched as the reality of the situation sank in across the faces on her screens. This wasn't about helping strangers anymore. This was about survival. Colony Administrator Jackson from Titan spoke first, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Admiral, what kind of response are we looking at? How many ships would we need?" Chen turned to her tactical officer. "Commander Park, give us the numbers." Commander Park stood and activated a new holographic display. Based on the energy signatures we're detecting and the scale of destruction described in the alien transmission, we're looking at a minimum fleet requirement of 200 vessels. That would include 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, 80 destroyers, and the remainder support ships. We'd need to mobilize every ship in the human fleet. "Every ship?" President Martinez asked, alarm clear in her voice. "Every combat-capable vessel, yes, ma'am. And even then, we'd be vastly outnumbered based on the swarm formations the aliens described." Chen stepped forward. "However, we have advantages these aliens likely don't possess. Humanity didn't become the apex predator of Earth by being the strongest or the fastest. We became dominant because we're the most adaptable, the most determined, and the most willing to do whatever it takes to survive." General Harrison's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. "The Admiral's right. These bugs, or whatever they are, they've probably been bulldozing through civilizations that never had to fight for their survival. They've never met humans." "What are you proposing, Admiral?" President Martinez asked. Chen took a deep breath. "Full fleet mobilization within 72 hours. Every ship, every crew member, every piece of military hardware we have. We jump to the Kepler system, assess the situation, and if there are survivors, we help them. If not, we make our stand there rather than waiting for the swarm to reach human space." The debate that followed was intense, but brief. Humanity had learned hard lessons about the cost of hesitation during the AI rebellion. When faced with an existential threat, there was only one option: overwhelming force applied with ruthless efficiency. Within 6 hours of the initial signal, President Martinez signed Emergency Authorization Omega-7, effectively placing humanity on a total war footing. Every military facility across human space erupted into activity as the largest fleet in human history began to assemble. At the shipyards orbiting Earth, massive dreadnoughts that had been in mothballs since the last colonial war were brought back online. Engineers worked around the clock to install humanity's newest weapons systems. Plasma cannons derived from solar collection technology, kinetic bombardment systems that could crack continents, and the experimental quantum torpedoes that existed more in theory than practice. On Mars, the famous Red Planet Marines loaded into assault ships, their powered armor gleaming under the artificial lights of the hangar bays. These were the descendants of the first terraformers, humans who had learned to thrive in environments that would kill most Earth-born people within minutes. If the aliens needed ground support, there were no better soldiers in the galaxy. The outer colonies contributed their own specialized forces. The miners from the asteroid belt brought ships designed to crack open planetoids, vessels that could be easily converted into siege platforms. The research stations contributed their most advanced sensor arrays and scientific equipment, knowing that understanding the enemy would be crucial to victory. But perhaps most importantly, the call went out to the independent operators, the smugglers, pirates, mercenaries, and explorers who lived on the edges of human space. These were people who had chosen to make their living in the most dangerous regions of the galaxy, who faced death daily and came back for more. When word spread through the underground networks about the alien threat, hundreds of these ships began making their way toward the rallying point at Luna Station. As Chen watched the fleet assemble through the observation deck, she felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Humanity was about to embark on its first interstellar war, and they were doing it to save a species they had never met against an enemy they barely understood. Dr. Webb joined her at the observation window, his tablet showing the latest translation attempts. "Admiral, I've been working on the alien language, and I think I understand why they contacted us specifically." "What do you mean?" The mathematical structures in their language suggest they've been monitoring radio transmissions from various star systems, including ours. Based on what I can decipher, they chose to contact us because... He paused, looking uncomfortable. Because why, Doctor? Because their analysis of our transmissions led them to conclude that humans are the most militaristic and violent species they'd ever encountered. They called us the Deathworld's children in their transmission. They contacted us because they believe we're the only species crazy enough to fight an unwinnable war. Chen stared out at the growing fleet, watching as humanity's most powerful weapons of war gathered for a mission that would either save two civilizations or destroy them both. In the distance, Earth hung like a blue marble, peaceful and beautiful, completely unaware that its children were about to travel 18 light-years to face something that consumed worlds. "Doctor," she said quietly, "I think they chose wisely." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Supply ships arrived carrying everything from ammunition to emergency rations. Medical vessels equipped with the most advanced trauma centers prepared for casualties on a scale humanity had never experienced. Engineering ships loaded with repair equipment and raw materials prepared to maintain the fleet during what could be a prolonged campaign. On the final day before departure, Chen called together the captains of every major vessel in the fleet. The conference room at Luna Station had never held so many people, and the air was thick with tension and determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen began, looking out at faces that represented the best of humanity's military leadership. "In 12 hours, we jump to the Kepler system. We don't know what we'll find there. We don't know if the aliens who sent the distress call are still alive. What we do know is that something out there poses a threat not just to them, but to every living thing in our galaxy." Captain Rodriguez of the Dreadnought Indomitable raised her hand. "Admiral, what are our rules of engagement? How do we handle first contact protocols if we encounter survivors?" "Standard diplomatic protocols apply for any alien survivors. As for the endless hunger," Chen's voice hardened. "Total war. No mercy, no quarter, no negotiations. We've seen what they do to inhabited worlds. Our mission is simple: find them, fight them, and destroy every last one of them." The room filled with grim nods of approval. These were people who understood the realities of warfare, who knew that sometimes survival required absolute brutality. As the meeting dispersed and the captains returned to their ships, Chen made her way to the communications center for one final transmission to Earth. President Martinez appeared on the screen, her face showing the strain of the last 3 days. "Admiral, the fleet is ready?" "Ready as we'll ever be, Madam President. 237 ships, the finest crews in human space, and enough firepower to crack a moon. If the endless hunger wants a fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." "Admiral," Martinez said quietly, "bring them home. I'll bring home everyone I can, ma'am. But I want you to understand. If we fail, if this swarm gets past us, you need to be ready. Start evacuation plans for the outer colonies, begin moving the population toward Earth and Mars, and prepare for the possibility that we might not be coming back." The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. In 6 hours, the largest fleet in human history would make its first faster-than-light jump to another star system. They were about to encounter alien life for the first time, engage in humanity's first interstellar war, and possibly face extinction. As she walked through the corridors of Luna Station, watching the final preparations, Chen couldn't help but think about Earth hanging in space behind them. 3 billion years of evolution had created humanity, shaped them into survivors, predators, and warriors. Now all of that evolutionary pressure was about to be tested against something that had already consumed countless worlds. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Admiral Sarah Chen smiled grimly and headed for her flagship. The endless hunger was about to learn why Earth was called a death world and why its children had never learned how to surrender. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system with a precision that would have impressed any military strategist. 237 ships materialized in perfect formation, their sensors immediately beginning to scan the system that had sent humanity its first message from another intelligent species. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship. The massive dreadnought Terran's Wrath, staring at the tactical display with growing horror. Where there should have been planets, only shattered debris fields remained. The gas giants had been stripped of their atmospheres, leaving behind bare, rocky cores. Even the system's asteroid belt showed signs of systematic consumption, with massive chunks missing as if something had taken bites out of solid rock. "Admiral," reported Commander Park, his voice tight with shock, "I'm reading the remnants of 7 planetary bodies. Based on spectral analysis, at least 3 of them supported life until very recently. The energy signatures suggest the destruction occurred within the last 2 weeks. Chen felt her jaw clench. They had come too late to save the aliens who had sent the distress call. But perhaps not too late to prevent the same fate from befalling other worlds. "Long-range sensors, Commander. Are we alone out here?" "Negative, Admiral. I'm detecting multiple contacts moving through the outer system. Whatever did this is still here." Park's fingers flew over his console. "Contacts are massive. I'm reading energy signatures comparable to our largest dreadnoughts, but the shapes are all wrong. They're organic." The main screen shifted to show the long-range sensor data. What Chen saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of creatures the size of space stations moved through the debris field, systematically consuming everything in their path. Their bodies were sleek and predatory, like sharks designed by a nightmare, with gaping maws that could swallow a cruiser whole. "My God," whispered Dr. Webb, who had been assigned to the flagship for the mission. "They're feeding on the planetary debris. They're literally eating the dead worlds." "How many, Commander?" Chen asked. "Initial count shows 43 large creatures, each approximately 800 meters in length. But, Admiral, I'm also detecting smaller signatures. Thousands of them. They appear to be scouts." As if summoned by his words, the tactical display erupted with new contacts. Smaller creatures, each about the size of a fighter craft, began streaming out from behind a cluster of asteroids. They moved with purpose and intelligence, forming attack formations that were both alien and terrifyingly efficient. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Battle stations. Prepare for contact with hostile forces. Remember, these things have already consumed multiple worlds. Do not underestimate them." She paused, looking around the bridge. "Today, humanity makes first contact. Let's make sure it's memorable." The alien scouts approached with a speed that shocked the human crews. Within minutes, they were close enough for detailed scans, revealing creatures that seemed to exist at the intersection of biology and technology. Their bodies were covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating, with weapon ports that glowed with the same energy signatures found at the edges of consumed planets. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Torres from the communication station, "I'm receiving transmissions from the alien scout formations. It's in multiple languages, including human languages." "Put it through," Chen ordered. The bridge filled with a sound like grinding metal, mixed with insect chittering. Then, impossibly, words began to emerge in clear English, followed by what sounded like dozens of other languages. New prey things arrive, good, fresh thoughts to consume, fresh worlds to strip. We are the endless hunger. We have consumed the crystal singers of 7 worlds in this system. We will consume you as well. Your thoughts will feed us. Your worlds will sustain us. Resistance is nourishment. Fighting only makes the meat more tender." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature control. The creatures weren't just predators. They were intelligent predators that had learned the languages of their victims by consuming them. "Admiral," Dr. Webb said, his voice shaking, "did you notice how they spoke? They've learned our languages, but they don't understand our psychology. They think fear makes us weaker. They have no idea what they just did." Chen smiled grimly. Webb was right. The aliens had just made a critical error. Instead of terrifying the human crews, their threats had triggered something much more dangerous: human rage. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. You heard the transmission. These things have been consuming intelligent species across the galaxy. They've learned our languages from their victims. They think we'll surrender like apparently everyone else has." She paused, letting her next words carry across every ship in the fleet. "They're about to learn why Earth is called a death world." The alien scouts struck first, diving toward the human formation with weapons that fired concentrated bursts of energy. But they had never faced anything like human military doctrine. The scouts expected their victims to break formation, to scatter in panic as their ships were destroyed. Instead, the human ships closed ranks and returned fire with a coordination that spoke of countless hours of training and an intimate familiarity with violence. The first wave of alien scouts disintegrated under the concentrated firepower of 200 human warships. Plasma cannons designed to crack asteroids carved through alien armor like it was paper. Kinetic rounds that could penetrate planetary shields punched holes clean through the organic hulls of the creatures. But the scouts had been testing them, probing for weaknesses. Now the larger creatures began to move. "Admiral, the big ones are accelerating toward us. Based on their approach vector, they'll be in weapons range in 12 minutes, reported Commander Park. "Signal the fleet. Implement Formation Delta 7. I want the dreadnoughts in front, cruisers providing flanking fire, and destroyers ready for close-in work. These things are big, but they're still just animals." As the human fleet arranged itself for battle, something unexpected happened. A new contact appeared on the sensors, small and fast, broadcasting what the Universal Translator identified as a surrender signal in the same alien language they had heard in the original distress call. "Admiral, we have a survivor," announced Lieutenant Torres. "Single ship, badly damaged, requesting permission to come alongside." Chen made a command decision that would change everything. "Grant permission, but keep weapons locked on them until we know what we're dealing with." The alien ship was unlike anything in human experience. It moved through space like a living thing, its hull rippling with patterns of light that might have been communication or simply the alien equivalent of breathing. As it approached the flagship, Chen could see the damage it had sustained, great tears in its hull that looked like bite marks from massive teeth. The docking procedure was awkward, with human engineers working frantically to create an interface between their technology and the alien vessel. Finally, after nearly an hour of work, they established an airlock connection. The first alien to enter human space was nothing like the science fiction stories had predicted. The being that stepped through the airlock stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms arranged symmetrically around a torso that seemed to be composed of crystalline structures that caught and refracted light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the sound came from resonating crystals embedded in its chest. "I am resonance of morning winds, last surviving harmony of the crystal singers of Kepler 442c. Your arrival brings hope to a symphony that thought itself silenced forever." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his portable translation unit working overtime to process the aliens' complex language. "We received your distress call. We came as quickly as we could, but you arrived too late to save my people," the alien said, its crystals dimming. "The endless hunger consumed 7 worlds in this system. Billions of voices silenced. But perhaps not too late to prevent the same fate from befalling others." Admiral Chen joined the conversation. "We need to understand what we're fighting. These creatures, how many are there? Where did they come from?" Resonance of morning wine's crystals flared brighter. They are not from any single world. They are ancient, older than most civilizations. They move through the galaxy in cycles, consuming everything in their path, then sleeping for millennia while they digest what they have taken. This cycle, they began their feast in the galactic rim and have been moving inward, consuming hundreds of worlds. How do they operate? What are their weaknesses? They have no weaknesses as you would understand them. They adapt, they learn, they consume not just flesh and matter, but knowledge itself. Every species they devour makes them stronger, smarter, more dangerous. The alien paused, its crystals pulsing with what might have been remembered terror. But they have never encountered a species like yours. Chen frowned. What do you mean? Every species they have consumed has tried to reason with them, to find peaceful solutions, to understand them. They consume philosophers and artists, scientists and teachers. But you... The alien's crystals began to emit a sound that might have been laughter. You are different. You came here with weapons of war. You speak of violence as if it were music. You are what my people would call a warrior species. Dr. Webb looked uncomfortable. We're not just warriors. Humans are capable of great art, science, philosophy. But when threatened, you default to violence. It is written in your very language, your body postures, the way you hold your weapons. The endless hunger has consumed 10,000 species across 1,000,000 years. None of them were warriors. Before Chen could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Commander Park's voice cracked with tension. Admiral, the large creatures are in weapons range. They're opening fire. The first salvo from the endless hunger was unlike anything in human military experience. Instead of energy beams or kinetic projectiles, the creatures fired something that looked like living lightning. Tendrils of energy that sought out targets with an intelligence of their own. The destroyer Valiant took a direct hit and simply stopped. Its lights went out, its engines died, and it began to drift. What the hell was that? Chen demanded. Resonance of morning wine's crystals turned a deep blue. Neural disruptors. They disable technology by consuming the electrical patterns that make it function. But they are designed for our technology, our neural patterns. Your systems might react differently. As if to prove the alien's point, the Valiant's lights suddenly flickered back to life. Its captain's voice came through the communication system, angry and confused. Admiral, something tried to shut us down, but our backup systems kicked in. We're operational and ready to fight. Chen smiled fiercely. Human technology had been designed by a species that had learned to be paranoid, to build multiple redundancies into every system. What worked against alien technology might not be as effective against human engineering. All ships, return fire. Target the big ones. Let's see how they handle human firepower. The response was immediate and devastating. Plasma cannons that had been designed to mine asteroids carved through alien armor like it was tissue paper. Kinetic bombardment systems that could crack continents punched holes through creatures the size of space stations. And for the first time in 1,000,000 years of feeding, the endless hunger encountered prey that fought back with technology specifically designed to kill. The largest of the creatures, a massive thing that dwarfed even the human dreadnoughts, let out a sound that somehow carried through the vacuum of space. A scream of pain and surprise that made every human in the fleet smile grimly. It had been wounded, badly, and it was not used to experiencing pain. Admiral, called Commander Park, the creatures are regrouping. They're learning from our attacks. The ones we haven't hit yet are modifying their approach patterns. Chen nodded. The alien had warned her about this. The endless hunger adapted, learned, became stronger. But they had never tried to adapt to humanity before. Signal the fleet. Implement attack pattern Chaos 7. Randomize all targeting solutions. If these things learn from our patterns, we'll make sure there are no patterns to learn from. What followed was the first space battle in human history, and it was unlike anything military theorists had ever imagined. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that confused and frustrated the alien creatures. Every time the endless hunger adapted to one tactic, the humans would switch to something completely different. When the creatures adapted to energy weapons, the humans switched to kinetic bombardment. When they learned to avoid the kinetic rounds, the humans deployed the experimental quantum torpedoes that existed partially outside normal space-time. When the creatures tried to close to melee range, expecting to overwhelm the human ships with their massive size, they discovered that humans had specifically designed weapons for close-quarters combat that turned the space around their ships into a killing field. The battle raged for 6 hours, with the human fleet suffering losses, but giving far better than they received. As Chen watched the tactical display, she realized something remarkable was happening. For the first time in their ancient existence, the endless hunger was being driven back, but the cost was terrible. 17 human ships had been destroyed, and hundreds of crew members were dead. The alien creatures, however, had suffered even worse losses. 23 of the large creatures had been destroyed or crippled, and the smaller scout forces had been completely eliminated. As the remaining creatures began to withdraw toward the outer system, resonance of morning winds approached Admiral Chen. Its crystals were pulsing with patterns that the translation unit identified as amazement and hope. In a million years of consumption, they have never retreated. Never. You have accomplished something that no other species has managed. You have made the endless hunger afraid. Chen looked at the tactical display, watching as the alien creatures fled toward the edge of the system. But even as she felt a moment of satisfaction, she knew this was far from over. How many more of them are there? The swarm that consumed my worlds was just one of dozens scattered across this region of the galaxy. Each swarm contains hundreds of the large creatures and millions of the smaller ones. What you have faced today is perhaps 1% of their total force. Chen felt the weight of that knowledge settle on her shoulders. They had won a single battle, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere out there, the rest of the endless hunger was consuming world after world, growing stronger with each victory. "Admiral," came Commander Park's voice, "I'm detecting faster-than-light signatures throughout the system. Multiple contacts, all moving away from us." Chen smiled grimly. The creatures were retreating, but they were also communicating with the rest of their kind. Soon, every swarm in the galaxy would know about humanity, about the Deathworld's children who fought back against the ancient hunger. The real war was about to begin. 3 weeks after the first battle, Admiral Chen stood in the war room of Luna Station. But she was no longer alone. The holographic table before her showed not just human space, but a three-dimensional map of the entire galaxy, marked with red zones where the endless hunger had been confirmed, and yellow areas where refugee ships reported swarm movement. Around the table stood representatives of 17 different alien species. The word had spread faster than anyone had imagined possible. Resonance of morning winds had somehow contacted other survivors, other refugee fleets that had been running from the swarms for decades. When they learned that someone had actually fought the endless hunger and won, they came from across the galaxy to see these impossible warriors from the death world called Earth. "The situation is worse than we initially understood," Chen said, activating the display. "Intelligence gathered from refugee ships indicates that the endless hunger is not just one species, but dozens of symbiotic organisms working together. They've been consuming worlds for over 2 million years, and they're coordinated across the entire galaxy." A new voice spoke, translated through universal communication systems. It belonged to Hive Mind of Broken Shells, representing a species of collective consciousness that had lost 90% of its population to the swarms. Admiral Chen, our projections show that even with your remarkable victory, the Hunger will adapt. They are already modifying their creatures based on combat data from Kepler 442. How do you propose to fight an enemy that learns from every encounter? Chen smiled, and several aliens stepped backward instinctively. They were still adjusting to human expressions, particularly ones that showed teeth. Hive Mind of Broken Shells raises an excellent point. The endless hunger adapts and learns from every fight, so we're going to teach them something that will destroy them. She manipulated the holographic display, showing troop movements across human space. We're going to teach them about human creativity, human unpredictability, and most importantly, human spite. Dr. Webb, now serving as humanity's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward with a data tablet. Admiral, the analysis of creature remains from our first battle has revealed something remarkable. The endless hunger doesn't just consume biological matter and technology. They consume patterns, languages, social structures, military tactics, even thought patterns. It's how they've become so efficient at destroying civilizations. A new alien spoke up, its translation rendered in mechanical tones. I am 0-point logic, last artificial intelligence of the machine collective. The hunger consumed my creators and 99% of my fellow AIs 300 years ago. I survived only by completely randomizing my behavioral patterns. But you speak as if this consumption of patterns is somehow advantageous to you. Chen's smile widened. Because it is. Every other species they've encountered has tried to fight them conventionally. They've learned to counter every logical military response, every reasonable tactical doctrine, but they've never tried to adapt to pure chaos backed up by genocidal determination. She activated a new section of the display, showing the human fleet's new composition. Ladies, gentlemen, and collective consciousnesses, let me introduce you to humanity's real weapons. The display showed ships unlike anything the aliens had seen before, vessels that seemed to have been designed by madmen, with weapon systems that defied conventional logic and tactical doctrines that appeared to have been written by someone who had never heard of military strategy. The Berserker-class assault ships, Chen explained, highlighting a group of vessels that looked more like flying scrapyards than warships. Minimal armor, maximum firepower, and piloted by volunteers from our prison colonies. Their tactical doctrine is literally charge straight at the enemy and shoot everything. 0-point logic's optical sensors flickered in what might have been confusion. Admiral, that is tactically unsound. Such vessels would be destroyed within minutes of engaging superior forces. Exactly. And while the endless hunger is adapting to counter these suicidal attacks, our real warships will be hitting them from completely different vectors with completely different tactics. Chen manipulated the display again. The Ghost Fleet, ships equipped with experimental cloaking technology and AI pilots programmed with the accumulated knowledge of humanity's greatest military minds and our most successful serial killers. Several aliens made sounds that the universal translators couldn't process, which Chen took as a good sign. And if that doesn't work, we have the Spite Fleet, automated vessels loaded with the most dangerous weapons humanity has ever created, piloted by AIs whose only programming is to cause as much damage as possible before being destroyed. Resonance of morning wind's crystals pulsed with patterns that indicated deep concern. Admiral, with respect, your strategies seem designed to maximize casualties among your own forces. That's because they are, Chen replied matter-of-factly. Every single human in this fleet volunteered knowing that survival was unlikely. We've studied your records, your histories of encounters with the endless hunger. Every species has tried to preserve their own lives while fighting them. We're going to do the opposite. Hive Mind of Broken Shells projected what seemed to be confusion. Admiral, I do not understand. Why would you deliberately sacrifice your own people? Dr. Webb stepped forward, because the endless hunger has never encountered a species that values victory more than survival. They've learned to counter every survival-based tactic in the galaxy, but they don't understand what happens when an entire species decides that death is preferable to defeat. Chen activated the next phase of the briefing. Intelligence indicates that the hunger operates from a central coordination nexus in the galactic core, a massive bioconstruct that has been growing for millions of years, processing the consumed knowledge of thousands of species and coordinating swarm activities across the entire galaxy. The holographic display shifted to show long-range sensor data from the galactic core. What they revealed was nightmare made manifest, a structure the size of a solar system, composed of organic matter from consumed worlds, pulsing with the combined intelligence of every species the endless hunger had ever devoured. Our mission is simple, Chen continued. We're going to fly directly to the galactic core and destroy that nexus. The silence that followed was profound. Several aliens began making sounds that the translators identified as expressions of disbelief, terror, and concern for Chen's sanity. 0 Point Logic was the first to speak. Admiral, such a mission would be suicide. The Nexus is surrounded by the largest concentration of hunger creatures in the galaxy, millions of them. Even if your entire fleet survived the journey, you would be outnumbered 10,000 to 1. Chen's expression didn't change. Then it's a good thing we're not planning to survive. What followed was the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Word spread through refugee networks and hidden colonies that the humans were attempting something impossible. Species that had been hiding from the endless hunger for centuries began to emerge, offering whatever resources they could spare to support the Deathworld's insane plan. The human fleet that assembled at the edge of the galaxy was unlike anything ever seen. 2,000 ships of every conceivable design, from massive dreadnoughts to tiny fighters piloted by humans who had volunteered for one-way missions. But more than that, it included vessels from dozens of alien species, survivors who had decided that dying in battle was better than living in fear. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the massive battleship Final Answer, and watched as the greatest armada in galactic history prepared for faster-than-light travel toward the galactic core. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had already accepted their deaths. "Admiral," reported Commander Park, "all ships report ready for hyperspace jump. Estimated travel time to the galactic core is 6 days. Signal the fleet," Chen ordered. "Today we journey to the heart of the galaxy to face an enemy that has never known defeat. We may not all make it home, but we're going to make sure the endless hunger remembers humanity." The jump to hyperspace was flawless, but the journey was anything but peaceful. Long-range sensors detected swarm movements throughout the galaxy, massive concentrations of creatures converging on the galactic core. The endless hunger knew they were coming, and it was preparing for them. On the 4th day of travel, they encountered the first of the Guardian swarms, a defensive formation of creatures unlike anything they had faced before. These were not the scouts, or even the large predators they had fought at Kepler 442. These were creatures the size of moons, with armor that could withstand stellar radiation and weapons that could crack planets. The battle should have been impossible. The Guardian swarm outnumbered the Allied fleet by hundreds to 1, and individual creatures were larger than entire human ships. But humanity had spent the journey preparing for exactly this scenario. The attack began with the Berserker fleet charging straight into the heart of the swarm, their crews screaming battle cries in a dozen human languages as they fired everything they had. The creatures adapted quickly, learning to counter the chaotic attack patterns exactly as the humans had planned. While the Guardian creatures were focused on the suicidal assault, the Ghost Fleet materialized from hyperspace at impossible angles, their cloaked ships appearing inside the swarm formation and unleashing weapons that violated several laws of physics. Quantum torpedoes that existed partially outside normal spacetime punched holes in reality itself, creating temporary black holes that consumed everything in their path. But the real devastation came from the Spite Fleet. Automated ships that had been programmed with one simple directive: cause maximum damage regardless of consequences. These vessels didn't try to survive, didn't attempt to withdraw when damaged, didn't even try to avoid enemy fire. They simply flew straight at the largest targets and detonated experimental weapons that had been deemed too dangerous for use by living crews. The Guardian swarm was obliterated in less than 2 hours, but the cost was terrible. Over half the human fleet had been destroyed, and casualties among the alien allies were severe. But something remarkable had happened. For the second time in galactic history, the endless hunger had been forced to retreat. On the 6th day, they reached the galactic core, and what they found there defied comprehension. The Nexus was even larger than their worst projections had suggested, a bioconstruct that dwarfed planets, pulsing with the stolen life force of 1 million consumed worlds. Around it, millions of creatures moved in perfect coordination, an army that had been accumulating for geological ages. "Admiral," whispered Commander Park, "I'm reading energy signatures that suggest the Nexus is powering up some kind of superweapon. Whatever it's planning, it's bigger than anything we've seen." Chen looked at the tactical display, calculating odds that made victory impossible by any rational measure. Then she did something that no other species had ever done when facing the endless hunger. She started to laugh. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Implement the final protocol." Across the fleet, human crews began activating systems that had been sealed since the beginning of the mission. Weapons that existed only in theory, technologies that no sane species would ever use, and tactical doctrines that had been designed by humanity's most creative psychopaths. The final protocol was exactly what its name suggested: humanity's last, desperate gambit against extinction. Every ship in the fleet would become a weapon, every crew member a willing sacrifice. And every piece of technology would be pushed beyond its design limits until it either succeeded or exploded. The attack began with something the endless hunger had never encountered: laughter. Human crews broadcast across all frequencies as they charged into the swarm, their voices raised in song, jokes, and curses. They weren't fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to ensure that something as beautiful and terrible as humanity would not be forgotten. The quantum torpedoes were the first to strike the Nexus, their reality-warping explosions creating tears in space-time itself. Behind them came kinetic projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of the speed of light, their impacts releasing energy equivalent to stellar explosions. And finally, as the human fleet sacrificed itself ship by ship against the overwhelming numbers of the swarm, came the final answer herself, her hull packed with every piece of experimental technology humanity had ever created. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on her bridge as the ship plowed through the defensive formations around the Nexus, her crew fighting and dying around her as alien weapons tore through their hull. She could see the Nexus growing larger on the screen, its surface crawling with defensive systems that had been created from the consumed remains of 1,000 species. "Admiral," gasped Dr. Webb, blood running from a head wound. "The Nexus is trying to communicate. It's offering to negotiate." Chen smiled one last time. "Tell it that humanity doesn't negotiate with things that eat children." The final answer's impact with the Nexus was visible from across the galactic core. The experimental weapons in her hull detonated simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that tore through the bioconstruct like a virus through living tissue. For the first time in 2 million years, the central coordination system of the endless hunger went silent. Across the galaxy, the effect was immediate. Swarms that had been operating with perfect coordination suddenly found themselves confused, leaderless, and vulnerable. Refugee fleets that had been running for decades turned and attacked their pursuers. Worlds that had been marked for consumption fought back with weapons provided by human engineers who had spent their last days teaching alien species the art of creative destruction. The endless hunger did not die easily. It took 3 more years of fighting to hunt down the scattered swarms, to destroy the remaining bioconstructs, and to ensure that the ancient threat was finally eliminated. But when the last creature was destroyed, when the last swarm ship was vaporized by combined fleet actions, the galaxy finally knew peace. The memorial that was erected at the site of the Nexus's destruction was built by 17 different species, each contributing materials from their home worlds. At its center stood a simple plaque, written in the languages of every species that had participated in the final battle. Here lie the crews of the human fleet that chose death over defeat. They came from a death world to teach the galaxy that some things are worth dying for. The stars themselves shall remember their names. But perhaps the most fitting monument to humanity's sacrifice was something that couldn't be built or carved. It was the fact that across the galaxy, in a dozen different languages, parents would tell their children bedtime stories about the impossible warriors from Earth who had looked at the ancient darkness and decided to punch it in the face. The endless hunger was gone, but humanity's legend was just beginning. And somewhere in the depths of space, the descendants of the human survivors were already building new ships and designing new weapons. Because the galaxy was a dangerous place, and someone had to keep the lights on. After all, they were the children of a death world, and they had never learned how to give up.